I still remember the night it happened. The sky turned dark and the wind howled like it was angry at us. Then the lightning came. It wasn't just any lightning, it was bright and loud, and it hit the middle of the village, right where the big tree used to stand. The tree burned up fast, but that wasn't the scariest part. From the fire, a woman walked out. She didn't look like any woman I had seen before. Her eyes were glowing and sparks jumped from her skin. I knew then something was very wrong. We all stood there staring. My mum pulled me close, but I couldn't look away. The woman didn't say a word. She just looked around at us, and then she disappeared into the night. That's when it all started. The next morning, everyone was quiet. The village was still in shock from what had happened the night before. The elders met in secret, but Kofi and I knew what they were discussing. The lightning woman's warning echoed in my head. Honor the storm, or I will return. My parents didn't talk much either. They tried to pretend everything was normal, but I saw the fear in their eyes. As the sun rose, the memory of the lightning woman faded for some, but not for me. I knew she could come back any time, and I had to be ready. Later that afternoon, the elders called a village meeting. They told everyone that the lightning woman was a spirit of nature, angry because the village had disrespected the old ways. They ordered everyone to leave offerings at the burnt tree and pray for forgiveness. Some people nodded in agreement, but I could see others rolling their eyes. Kofi whispered to me, "Do you think this will be enough?" I wasn't sure. The lightning woman didn't seem like the type to be easily satisfied. I felt that the village had much more to do if we were going to keep her from coming back. For a few days, the village tried its best to follow the elders' plan. People brought food, beads, and other offerings to the burnt tree where the lightning had struck. At first, it seemed to calm everyone down. The storms even seemed to ease a little. But deep down, I knew it wasn't enough. The unease stayed with me. The wind still whispered at night, and I couldn't help but feel that the lightning woman was watching us, waiting for us to fail. One wrong move, and she would come back. I could feel it in my bones. As the days passed, small, strange things started happening in the village. Chickens went missing, and crops began to wilt. Even the cows seemed restless, refusing to graze near the edge of the forest. No one talked about it openly, but people were nervous. Kofi and I noticed the lightning had started again, small flashes in the distance every night. It was like the storm was waiting to come back, lurking just beyond the horizon. I didn't know how long we had before the lightning woman returned, but it didn't feel like we had much time. Then one day a girl from the village went missing. Her name was Amara, and she had been playing near the river when she disappeared. The village searched everywhere, but no one could find her. The whispers started again. People said the lightning woman had taken her. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew it was true. The village hadn't done enough to honor the storms. The lightning woman was still angry, and now she was punishing us. I told Kofi that we had to do something, but we didn't know where to start. As the days passed without any sign of Amara, the village grew more desperate. The elders held another meeting, this time demanding that we bring more offerings to the burnt tree. But it didn't feel like enough. People were starting to panic. Some villagers even started packing their things, planning to leave before the lightning woman could take anyone else. But Kofi and I knew running wouldn't help. The lightning woman would find us wherever we went. The only way to stop her was to make things right. Kofi and I decided we had to do something different. We couldn't just leave offerings and hope for the best. We had to find the source of the lightning woman's anger and fix it. That meant leaving the village and going to the sacred mountain, where we believed the guardian spirit once lived. The journey would be dangerous, but we had no choice. If we didn't act, more people would disappear, and the storms would get worse. So, one night, we packed what little we had and slipped out of the village. Our journey had begun. The path to the mountain was long and twisted. The further we walked, the darker it seemed to get, even though it was still daytime. The wind howled through the trees, and it felt like the lightning woman was watching us with every step we took. But we kept going. We had no choice. The only thing scarier than the journey was the thought of what would happen if we failed. As we climbed higher, the air grew colder, and the clouds gathered above us. The storm was following us. After days of walking, we finally reached the foot of the mountain. There, we found the ruins of an old shrine, half buried in the earth. This was where the guardian spirit once lived, but it had been abandoned for years. The shrine was broken and the sacred stones were cracked. We knelt before the shrine and tried to pray, hoping the spirit would hear us. But the wind howled louder and the clouds grew darker. The spirit was gone, and without it, we were on our own. The lightning woman's power was growing stronger. That night, the storm broke. Lightning flashed all around us, and thunder shook the ground. Kofi and I huddled together under a tree, trying to stay dry, but the rain was relentless. Suddenly, a bright flash lit up the sky, and there she was, the lightning woman. She stood in the distance, watching us. Her eyes glowed with the same strange light I had seen before. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice like the wind. I froze, unsure of what to say. But Kofi stepped forward and said, "We're here to make things right." The lightning woman stared at us for what felt like forever. Then she spoke again, her voice low and threatening. "It's too late," she said. "The storm is coming, and it will not be stopped." "We can fix this," I said, my voice shaking. "Just tell us how." But the lightning woman shook her head. "The storm has a life of its own now," she said. "It cannot be controlled." With that, she disappeared into the rain, leaving us alone and terrified. The storm was bigger than we thought. The next morning, we decided to continue our journey up the mountain. The lightning woman's warning weighed heavily on us, but we couldn't give up. We had to find a way to stop the storm, no matter what. As we climbed higher, the air grew colder and the wind picked up, blowing sharp and fast against our skin. The mountain felt alive, like it was angry. We knew we were getting closer to something, but we didn't know what. Halfway up the mountain, we stumbled upon a small hut. Inside, we found an old man, sitting quietly by a fire. His face was lined with age, and his eyes seemed to know things we couldn't understand. "I've been expecting you," he said without looking up. "You're here because of the storm." Kofi and I exchanged a glance, surprised. The old man smiled. "The storm has been brewing for a long time," he said, "but the lightning woman isn't the only one who can control it." The old man told us that long ago the village had a pact with the storm spirits. In exchange for respect and offerings, the spirits kept the village safe from dangerous storms. But over time, the villagers forgot the old ways and the pact was broken. That's when the lightning woman appeared. "The only way to stop the storm," the old man said, "is to restore the pact." But it wouldn't be easy. The storm spirits were angry, and convincing them to forgive the village would take more than offerings. It would take a sacrifice. The old man told us that the storm spirits lived at the very top of the mountain, where the sky touched the earth. They were powerful and unpredictable, and they didn't trust humans anymore. "If you want to stop the storm," he said, "you'll need to face the spirits yourself." Kofi and I were scared, but we knew we had no choice. We thanked the old man and continued our climb, our hearts heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. The higher we climbed, the louder the wind roared. The storm spirits were waiting for us. As we climbed closer to the top of the mountain, the wind became almost unbearable. It whipped around us, pulling at our clothes and pushing us back. Each step felt harder than the last, but we couldn't stop. The storm was growing stronger and we could feel the storm spirits watching us. Finally, we reached the summit. The sky above us was dark and swirling, and the air crackled with electricity. In the center of the storm stood 3 figures, their forms flickering like lightning. The storm spirits had arrived. The storm spirits didn't speak at first. They simply watched us with eyes made of clouds and thunder. When they finally spoke, Their voices were deep and rumbling, like the earth itself was talking. "Why have you come?" they asked. "We're here to restore the pact," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The spirits didn't respond right away. Instead, they whispered among themselves, their voices blending with the wind. Finally, one of them spoke. "To restore the pact, you must prove your worth. Will you accept our challenge?" Kofi and I didn't hesitate. We agreed to the storm spirits' challenge, even though we didn't know what it would be. The spirits nodded and waved their hands. In an instant, the wind stopped, and the air grew deathly still. "Your first test is the test of strength," one of the spirits said. "Survive the storm." Before we could react, lightning cracked across the sky, and a fierce wind whipped around us. The storm hit us with full force, knocking us to the ground. We struggled to stand, but the wind was too strong. All we could do was hold on and hope we could survive. The storm seemed to last forever. The wind screamed in our ears, and the rain hit us like sharp stones. Every few seconds, lightning flashed across the sky, lighting up the mountain in terrifying white light. Kofi and I clung to the rocks, trying to stay grounded. Finally, after what felt like hours, the storm began to calm. The wind died down, and the rain slowed to a light drizzle. The storm spirits reappeared, their forms flickering in the mist. "You have passed the first test," they said, "but there are 2 more." The storm spirits told us that the second test was the test of wisdom. "To pass this test," one of the spirits said, "you must answer our question correctly. If you fail, the storm will consume you." My heart raced. I wasn't sure I was ready for this, but I had to try. The spirit asked, "What is more powerful than the storm, but can be destroyed by a single word?" Kofi and I looked at each other, confused. We had no idea what the answer could be. But then, something clicked in my mind. "Silence," I whispered. The storm spirits were silent for a moment. Then they nodded. "You are wise," they said. "You have passed the second test." I breathed a sigh of relief, but I knew we weren't done yet. There was still one more test to go, and it would be the hardest of all. The final test, the spirits told us, was the test of sacrifice. "To restore the pact," they said, "you must offer something valuable, something that means more to you than anything else. Only then will the storm forgive your village." I swallowed hard. What could we possibly offer? Kofi and I sat in silence, thinking about what we could sacrifice. We didn't have much with us, just a few supplies and the clothes on our backs. But the storm spirits didn't want material things. They wanted something more personal, something deeper. After a long silence, Kofi spoke up. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "I'll offer my strength." I stared at him, shocked. Kofi was the strongest person I knew, both physically and mentally. His strength was what had kept us going this far, but he was willing to give it up for the village. The storm spirits watched as Kofi knelt before them, his face determined. "I offer my strength," he said again. The spirits whispered among themselves, their voices blending with the wind. Finally, they nodded. "Your sacrifice is accepted," they said. In an instant, the air around us seemed to shift. The wind calmed, and the storm clouds began to break apart, revealing the sun for the first time in days. The pact had been restored, and the storm spirits had forgiven the village. But Kofi had made a great sacrifice, and I didn't know how it would affect him. As the storm cleared, Kofi and I made our way back down the mountain. The journey was much easier now that the wind had stopped, but Kofi seemed weaker. He stumbled several times, and I had to help him walk. It was clear that his sacrifice had taken a toll on him. When we finally reached the village, the people were overjoyed to see us. They had been living in fear of the storm for so long, and now it was finally over. But as they celebrated, I couldn't help but feel a deep sadness for what Kofi had given up. The days that followed were peaceful. The village was no longer plagued by storms, and the crops began to grow again. People were happier, and the fear that had once gripped us was gone. The elders thanked Kofi and me for what we had done, and they promised to never forget the pact with the storm spirits. But Kofi wasn't the same. He had given up his strength, and now he struggled with even the simplest tasks. He never complained, but I could see the pain in his eyes. He had made a great sacrifice, and I didn't know if he would ever fully recover. Just when we thought the village was safe, strange things began to happen again. The animals in the forest started acting strange, wandering too close to the village and making strange sounds. People whispered that the spirits were restless again. One night, a terrible wind blew through the village, carrying with it the scent of smoke and ash. The elders said it was a bad omen, a sign that something darker was coming. We thought we had made peace with the storm, but now it seemed like a new threat was rising. The very next day, a fire broke out on the edge of the village. It spread quickly, fueled by the wind, and soon it was threatening our homes. We managed to put it out, but the damage was done. People were scared again, and they began to wonder if the storm spirits had truly forgiven us. Kofi and I knew something was wrong. The fires weren't natural. It was like the storm spirits had been replaced by something else, something angrier. We had to find out what was happening before the village was consumed by fire. Kofi and I decided to investigate the fires. We started by asking the villagers if they had seen anything unusual before the fire started. Most people said they had seen nothing, but one old woman told us she had seen strange shadows moving through the forest the night before. We followed her directions and headed into the forest, hoping to find some clues. As we walked deeper into the woods, the trees grew thicker, and the air became heavy with smoke. Something wasn't right, and we could feel it. As we moved further into the forest, we spotted a figure in the distance. It was tall and shrouded in dark smoke, barely visible through the trees. Kofi and I stopped in our tracks, unsure of what to do. The figure didn't seem to notice us at first, but then it turned toward us. Its eyes glowed a fiery red, and its face was twisted with anger. "Leave this place," it growled, its voice like the crackle of flames. Kofi and I ran as fast as we could, but I knew we couldn't run forever. The fire spirit had awoken. When we returned to the village, we told the elders what we had seen. They were shocked and scared. The fire spirit was a legend, an ancient force of destruction that had been sleeping for centuries. If it was awake now, it meant the village was in grave danger. The elders decided to hold a meeting to figure out what to do. They told everyone to stay inside and avoid the forest at all costs. But Kofi and I knew that wasn't enough. The fire spirit was angry, and it wouldn't stop until it had destroyed everything in its path. The only way to stop the fire spirit, we realized, was to seek help from the storm spirits again. They were the ones who had helped us before, and we hoped they could help us now, but we had no idea if they would even listen. Kofi and I made our way back to the mountain, hoping to speak with the storm spirits. As we climbed, the air grew colder and the sky darkened. The storm spirits were watching, but we didn't know if they would help us this time. When we reached the top of the mountain, we called out to the storm spirits, but there was no answer. The sky remained clear, and the wind was still. It was like the spirits had abandoned us, leaving us to face the fire spirit on our own. Kofi and I didn't know what to do. Without the storm spirit's help, we had no way of stopping the fire spirit. We couldn't fight it on our own, but we couldn't let it destroy the village either. We were running out of time. Back in the village, Kofi came up with a dangerous plan. He suggested that we lure the fire spirit into the open and trap it using a sacred circle we had learned about in the village's old stories. The circle could contain spirits, but it was dangerous to make. And if we failed, the fire spirit could destroy everything. I was scared, but I knew Kofi was right. We had no other choice. Together, We gathered the materials we needed and prepared to face the fire spirit once more. It took us all day to prepare the sacred circle. We drew it carefully on the ground, using chalk and ash, just as the old stories had described. Every line had to be perfect, or the circle wouldn't work. As we worked, the air around us grew hotter, and we could feel the fire spirit getting closer. By nightfall, the circle was ready and we were exhausted. But we couldn't rest yet. The fire spirit was coming, and we had to be ready for whatever happened next. That night, we saw the fire spirit again. It appeared at the edge of the forest, its fiery eyes glowing in the dark. We stood in the middle of the circle, hoping it would be enough to protect us. The fire spirit moved toward us slowly, its flames crackling louder with each step. When it reached the edge of the circle, it stopped. For a moment, I thought our plan had worked, but then the fire spirit laughed. "You think this can stop me?" it growled. I could feel the heat of its flames on my skin, and I realized we were in more danger than we had thought. The fire spirit stepped forward, and to our horror, it crossed the edge of the circle without hesitation. The trap hadn't worked. I felt my heart race as the fire spirit moved closer, its flames flickering dangerously. Kofi and I backed away, but there was nowhere to run. I thought we were doomed, but then something strange happened. The wind began to pick up, and the air grew colder. The storm spirits had returned. The wind roared around us as the storm spirits appeared, their forms flickering in the night. The fire spirit hissed in anger as the storm spirits surrounded it. The air crackled with tension. The fire and storm locked in a silent standoff. "We cannot hold it for long," one of the storm spirits whispered. "It has grown too strong in its anger." I could see the fire spirit struggling against their power, its flames growing wilder. Kofi and I watched, unsure of what to do next. The storm spirits were helping, but we needed a plan to end this once and for all. The fire spirit let out a deafening roar, its flames bursting higher, scorching the ground around it. "You think your pitiful storms can stop me?" it growled, its fiery eyes glaring at the storm spirits. The wind howled and lightning cracked across the sky, but the fire spirit's rage only grew. Kofi and I knew we couldn't just stand by. We had to find a way to weaken the fire spirit. But how? The storm spirits were struggling to contain it, and the sacred circle had failed. We needed a new idea, and we needed it fast. In the middle of the chaos, I remembered something. The old hermit on the mountain had once mentioned a story about fire and storms. It was a legend about a powerful rain that had once drowned the flames of an angry spirit. Could that be the key? I quickly told Kofi about the legend. "We need to bring the rain," I said, my voice shaking. Kofi nodded, but there was a problem. The rain didn't come, unless it was called by a special ritual, one we had never learned. We were running out of time, but we had to try. The storm spirits overheard our conversation and nodded in agreement. "The rain can defeat the fire spirit," they said, "but you must call it with the ritual of the ancient rainmakers. Do you know it?" I shook my head, but one of the spirits smiled faintly. "We can guide you." Together, Kofi and I gathered the items needed for the ritual: water from the river, leaves from the tallest tree, and a stone from the mountain. The storm spirits instructed us on how to place them in a circle and chant the words. The air around us grew colder as we began the ritual, the storm swirling overhead. As we chanted, the wind picked up and dark clouds gathered above us. The fire spirit roared in defiance, its flames lashing out toward us. But the storm spirits held it back just long enough for us to finish. With a final clap of thunder, the sky opened and the rain began to fall. At first, it was just a few drops, but soon it became a torrential downpour. The fire spirit screamed as the rain soaked its flames, weakening it. The storm spirits pushed it back, their power growing stronger as the rain fell harder. For the first time, I felt hope. The fire spirit struggled, its flames sputtering as the rain poured down. It tried to fight back, but the storm spirits were relentless, their winds and lightning overpowering it. Kofi and I watched from the edge of the circle, too afraid to move but too fascinated to look away. "This isn't over," the fire spirit snarled, its voice weaker now. "You may have stopped me today, but I will return." With a final burst of flames, the fire spirit vanished into the smoke, leaving only embers behind. The storm spirits faded with it, the sky clearing as the rain slowed to a gentle drizzle. The fire spirit was gone, but the village had been left shaken. We returned to find people waiting for us, their faces filled with fear and relief. The elders rushed forward, asking what had happened. Kofi and I explained everything: the fire spirit, the storm spirits, and the rain ritual. The villagers listened in silence, their expressions grim. The storm had saved us this time, but we knew the fire spirit's words were true. It wasn't over. The spirit had promised to return, and we didn't know when or how. The days following the battle were tense. The village was calm, but the threat of the fire spirit loomed over us. People whispered about the fire returning, and some even started leaving offerings at the burnt tree again, hoping to keep the spirits at bay. Kofi and I stayed vigilant, watching the skies for any sign of trouble. The storm spirits had given us a second chance, but it felt like we were living on borrowed time. The fire spirit's promise echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it would come back stronger than before. With the fire spirit gone for now, Kofi and I decided to seek out the old hermit again. We needed more answers, and we hoped he could tell us what to do next. The journey back to the mountain was quiet, the air still heavy with the memory of the battle. When we arrived at the hermit's hut, he was already waiting for us. "I knew you would come," he said, his voice calm but serious. "The fire spirit has been defeated, but its anger still burns. You have much to learn if you are to protect the village." The hermit explained that the fire spirit's power came from deep within the earth. "It is born from the heat and anger of the world itself," he said. "When the balance between fire and storm is broken, the spirit awakens." He warned that the spirit would return unless the village learned to maintain that balance. "But how do we do that?" I asked. The hermit smiled faintly. "By honoring both the fire and the storm. You cannot fear one and forget the other. Both are part of nature, and both must be respected." The hermit's words weighed heavily on us as we made our way back to the village. We realized that we had only been thinking of the storm spirits and ignoring the fire spirit's place in the natural order. If we wanted to prevent another disaster, we had to find a way to honor both forces. When we returned to the village, we shared what we had learned with the elders. They listened carefully and agreed that we needed to change our ways. A new ceremony was planned, one that would honor both the fire and the storm. The entire village gathered at the burnt tree for the new ceremony. The elders led the way, offering prayers to both the storm and the fire. We placed offerings of water and firewood at the base of the tree, symbolizing the balance between the two forces. As the ceremony began, the air felt different, calmer yet more powerful. The wind blew gently, and a small flame flickered at the foot of the tree. For the first time, we felt like we were in harmony with the elements. The ceremony was a success, but we knew this was just the beginning. In the days following the ceremony, the village felt different. The crops grew stronger, and the weather remained calm. People were no longer afraid of the storms or the fire. Instead, they saw them as part of life, forces to be respected and understood. Kofi and I spent our time learning more about the old traditions, the ones that had been forgotten. We realized that the village had once lived in harmony with nature, but over time, those practices had been lost. Now it was our job to help bring them back. The peace lasted for a few weeks, but then one evening, the sky darkened again. At first, we thought it was just another storm, but this time, it felt different. The air was heavy, and the wind howled louder than before. The fire spirit's promise echoed in my mind. Was it coming back? Kofi and I prepared for the worst, gathering the village together and reminding them of what we had learned. We couldn't let fear take hold again. The balance between fire and storm had to be maintained, or the cycle of destruction would begin anew. As night fell, the fire spirit appeared once more. This time its flames were smaller, more controlled, but the anger in its eyes was still there. It circled the village, its fiery form casting long shadows on the ground. "You have learned nothing," it roared, its voice crackling like dry wood. But this time, the village didn't panic. The elders stepped forward, offering prayers to the fire spirit, just as they had during the ceremony. Kofi and I watched, holding our breath, hoping that the balance we had worked so hard to restore would hold. The fire spirit snarled, its flames flaring higher for a moment, but then something unexpected happened. The flames began to die down, and the spirit's anger seemed to fade. It looked around, confused, as if it didn't understand what was happening. The elders continued their prayers, and slowly the fire spirit backed away. It wasn't defeated, but it seemed to recognize that things had changed. For the first time, we saw the fire spirit not as an enemy, but as a force that could be reasoned with. The fire spirit didn't attack that night. Instead, it lingered at the edge of the village, watching us with glowing eyes. It was a strange sight, neither peaceful nor hostile. It seemed like the spirit was testing us, waiting to see if we had truly learned to respect the balance. The next morning, the spirit was gone, leaving behind only a few smoldering embers. The village breathed a sigh of relief, but we knew this wasn't the end. The fire spirit had shown mercy this time, but the truce was fragile. We had to keep working to maintain the balance. After the fire spirit's visit, the elders became even more determined to teach the village about the old ways. They told stories of the past, of how our ancestors had lived in harmony with the elements. They explained that the fire spirit wasn't just a force of destruction, it was also a symbol of life and renewal. Kofi and I listened carefully, taking in everything we could. We knew that the future of the village depended on our ability to understand the spirits and keep the balance. But as we learned more, we realized just how much we still didn't know. One evening, as we sat by the river, Kofi and I discussed what we had learned. "Do you think there are other spirits we don't know about?" Kofi asked, his brow furrowed. The thought had crossed my mind before. We had dealt with the storm and the fire, but what about the earth, the river, or the wind? The more we thought about it, the more we realized that the village had only scratched the surface of the spirit world. If we wanted to truly live in harmony with nature, we had to learn about all the spirits, not just the ones we had encountered so far. With the elders' blessing, Kofi and I decided to set out on a new journey, one that would take us beyond the village and into the unknown. We wanted to learn about the other spirits, the ones that hadn't revealed themselves yet. It was a dangerous mission, but we felt ready. We packed our bags, said our goodbyes, and headed toward the forest. The path ahead was uncertain, but we were determined to find the answers we needed. As we walked, I couldn't help but wonder what new challenges lay ahead. The spirits were watching us, and we had much to learn. Our first stop was the river that flowed near the village. It was calm and peaceful, but we had heard stories of a powerful spirit that lived beneath its surface. The villagers called it the River Guardian, a spirit that controlled the flow of water and protected the land. We set up camp by the riverbank and waited. For hours, nothing happened. But just as the sun began to set, the water started to ripple, and a figure emerged from the depths. The River Guardian was here. The River Guardian was tall and graceful, its form shimmering like water. It looked at us with piercing eyes, its voice soft but commanding. "Why have you come?" it asked. Kofi and I explained our mission, telling the spirit that we wanted to learn about the balance between fire, storm, and water. The guardian listened carefully, then spoke again. "The balance you seek is fragile," it said. "But you must also remember that water, like fire and storm, can be both gentle and fierce. If the balance is not maintained, the river will rise and the land will suffer. The river guardian told us that if we wanted to truly understand the balance of water, we had to face its power. You must enter the river, it said. Only by feeling its strength will you learn what it means to live in harmony with the water. Kofi and I hesitated for a moment, but we knew this was the only way. We stepped into the river, the cold water rushing around our legs. At first, it was gentle, but then the current grew stronger, pulling us deeper into the water. We had to fight to stay on our feet, but we refused to give up. The current grew stronger and stronger, and I thought we might be swept away. But just as we were about to lose our footing, the water suddenly calmed. The river guardian appeared before us again, its form shimmering in the fading light. "You have passed the test," it said, its voice filled with pride. "You have shown respect for the power of the river, and you have learned that water, like fire and storm, must be treated with care. Remember this lesson, for it will guide you in the days to come." With the river guardian's blessing, Kofi and I continued our journey. We had learned an important lesson about the power of water, but we knew there was still much more to discover. The balance of nature was complex, and we were only beginning to understand its many layers. As we walked through the forest, we talked about what we had learned so far. The fire spirit, the storm spirits, and the river guardian had all taught us valuable lessons. But we knew there were other forces at play. What other spirits were out there waiting to be discovered? Our next stop was the edge of the forest, where the trees thinned out and the wind blew freely. We had heard rumors of a spirit that controlled the wind, a force that could be as gentle as a breeze or as fierce as a hurricane. The villagers called it the Wind Weaver. We set up camp in an open field and waited for the Wind Weaver to appear. At first, the wind was calm, barely stirring the leaves around us. But as night fell, the wind began to pick up, swirling around us in a strange, rhythmic pattern. The Wind Weaver was near. The Wind Weaver appeared as a swirling figure made of air and light. It moved gracefully, its form constantly shifting with the wind. "Why do you seek me?" it asked, its voice like the whisper of the breeze. We told the spirit about our journey, explaining that we wanted to learn about the balance of the elements. The Wind Weaver listened, then began to hum a soft, melodic tune. The wind around us shifted with the melody, and I realized that the spirit was weaving the wind like a song. "The wind is a song of life," it said. "To understand the wind, you must learn to listen to its melody." The Wind Weaver taught us how to listen to the wind, showing us how each gust and breeze carried its own rhythm and meaning. "The wind can be a gentle friend or a fierce enemy," it said, "but it is always a part of the world's song. If you wish to live in harmony with the wind, you must learn to respect its music." Kofi and I practiced listening to the wind, trying to understand its subtle changes. The Wind Weaver guided us, showing us how the wind could carry messages from the spirits, how it could warn of storms, and how it could bring peace to the land. The Wind Weaver gave us a final test, to stand in the center of a storm and listen to the wind's song. "Only by facing the storm will you understand the true power of the wind," it said. Kofi and I nodded, knowing that this test would be difficult, but necessary. We stood in the open field as the wind picked up, swirling around us in a powerful storm. The wind howled, and the air was filled with the sound of rushing air. But amid the chaos, we listened carefully, trying to find the melody of the wind. As we stood in the storm, I began to hear it, a faint melody carried on the wind, a song that was both beautiful and haunting. Kofi heard it too, and together we stood our ground, listening to the wind's song. The storm raged around us, but we weren't afraid. We had learned to respect the wind, and in return, it protected us. When the storm finally passed, the Wind Weaver appeared again. "You have learned well," it said, its voice filled with pride. The wind is your ally now. Remember its song, and it will guide you on your journey. With the wind weaver's blessing, Kofi and I continued our journey. We had learned much about the balance of nature, but we knew there were still other spirits to discover. The wind, fire, water, and storm were all connected, but we had yet to learn about the earth itself. As we walked through the forest, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the power of the spirits. They were all around us, guiding and protecting us. But I also knew that the balance was fragile, and that it was our responsibility to maintain it. Our next destination was the heart of the forest, where the trees grew tall and thick, their roots digging deep into the earth. We had heard stories of a spirit that controlled the land itself, a powerful force that could shake the ground and move mountains. The villagers called it the Earth Shaper. We set up camp near a massive tree, its roots twisting and curling around the rocks. As we waited, the ground beneath us began to tremble, and a deep rumbling filled the air. The Earth Shaper was coming. The Earth Shaper emerged from the ground, its form made of stone and soil. It was massive, towering over us like a living mountain. "Why have you come to disturb the earth?" it asked, its voice deep and rumbling. We explained our journey, telling the Earth Shaper that we wanted to learn about the balance of the elements. The Earth Shaper listened, then nodded slowly. "The earth is the foundation of all life," it said. "Without it, there would be no fire, no water, no wind. To understand the balance, you must first understand the strength of the earth." The Earth Shaper showed us the power of the land, demonstrating how the earth could shake and move, how it could give life or take it away. "The earth is patient," it said, "but it is also strong. Respect its power and it will protect you. Disrespect it and it will remind you of its strength." Kofi and I stood in awe as the Earth Shaper lifted massive stones with ease, shaping the land as if it were clay. We realized then just how important the earth was to the balance of nature. Without the earth, nothing else could exist. The Earth Shaper gave us a final test, to dig deep into the earth and find a hidden stone, one that held the essence of the land. "Only by finding the heart of the earth will you understand its strength," it said. Kofi and I nodded, determined to pass the test. We spent hours digging into the ground, our hands dirty and our bodies tired. But we didn't give up. We knew that the stone was there, waiting for us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we found it, a smooth, glowing stone that pulsed with the energy of the earth. We brought the stone to the Earth Shaper, who smiled in approval. "You have found the heart of the earth," it said. "You have shown respect for its strength, and in return, the earth will protect you." The Earth Shaper placed the stone back into the ground, and the earth trembled with power. With the Earth Shaper's blessing, Kofi and I continued our journey. We had learned much about the balance of nature, but we knew there were still more spirits to discover. The land, the wind, the water, and the fire were all connected, but we had yet to learn about the spirit of life itself. Our next stop was the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to open fields filled with wildflowers and tall grass. We had heard rumors of a spirit that controlled life itself, a force that could bring life to the land or take it away. The villagers called it the Life Giver. We set up camp in the middle of the field, waiting for the Life Giver to appear. As the sun began to set, a soft breeze blew through the grass, and the flowers around us seemed to come alive. The Life Giver was near. The Life Giver appeared as a glowing figure made of light and energy. It moved gracefully through the field, its touch bringing new life to the flowers and grass. "Why have you come?" it asked, its voice soft and gentle. We told the spirit about our journey, explaining that we wanted to learn about the balance of life. The Life Giver listened carefully, then smiled. "Life is a gift," it said, but it is also fragile. To understand the balance of life, you must first learn to nurture it. Only then will you truly understand the gift of life. The life giver showed us how to care for the land, teaching us how to plant seeds and tend to the earth. Life must be nurtured, it said. It cannot thrive on its own. Just as you care for the land, so too must you care for the balance of nature. Without life, there can be no balance. Kofi and I spent the day working with the life giver, learning how to plant and grow new life. It was a peaceful and fulfilling experience, but we knew that the balance of life was fragile. We had to be careful, or the balance could be broken. The life giver gave us a final test, to bring life to a barren patch of land. Only by giving life where there is none will you understand the true power of the gift, it said. Kofi and I nodded, knowing that this test would be difficult, but we were determined to succeed. We worked together, planting seeds and tending to the soil. At first, nothing happened, but we didn't give up. We knew that life took time, and we had to be patient. Finally, after hours of work, we saw the first sprouts of green breaking through the soil. We had passed the test. The life giver smiled as the plants grew around us. You have learned well, it said. Life is a gift, but it must be nurtured and respected. Remember this lesson, for it will guide you in the days to come. With the life giver's blessing, Kofi and I continued our journey. We had learned much about the balance of nature, but we knew there was still more to discover. The spirits of fire, water, wind, earth, and life had all taught us valuable lessons, but we had yet to learn about the spirit of death. Our final destination was the edge of a dark forest, where the trees were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. We had heard stories of a spirit that controlled death itself, a force that could take life or guide it to the afterlife. The villagers called it the Death Keeper. We set up camp near the edge of the forest, waiting for the Death Keeper to appear. The air around us was cold and still, and a sense of unease settled over us. We knew this would be our most difficult test yet. The Death Keeper appeared as a shadowy figure, its form shifting and changing with the wind. "Why have you come to this place of death?" it asked, its voice low and haunting. We explained our journey, telling the spirit that we wanted to learn about the balance of life and death. The Death Keeper listened, then spoke again. "Death is not something to be feared," it said. "It is a natural part of the cycle of life, but it is also powerful and it must be respected. If you wish to understand the balance, you must first face death itself." The Death Keeper gave us a final test, to walk through the forest of death and find the heart of the afterlife. "Only by facing death will you understand its power," it said. Kofi and I nodded, knowing that this test would be the most dangerous of all. We entered the forest, the air around us cold and heavy. The trees creaked and groaned as we walked, and the shadows seemed to move with us. But we didn't turn back. We knew that this was the only way to complete our journey. As we walked deeper into the forest, we began to see strange things, figures moving in the shadows, whispers in the wind. It felt like the spirits of the dead were watching us, guiding us toward the heart of the afterlife. Finally, we reached a clearing in the center of the forest. In the middle of the clearing stood a massive tree, its branches twisted and black. This was the heart of the afterlife, the place where the dead came to rest. The Death Keeper appeared before us, its shadowy form blending with the darkness of the forest. "You have faced death," it said, its voice calm and solemn. "You have shown respect for its power, and in return the dead will guide you. Remember this lesson, for it is the most important of all." With the Death Keeper's blessing, Kofi and I left the forest. We had completed our journey, and we had learned about the balance of life and death. The spirits had taught us valuable lessons, and now it was time to return to the village. When we returned to the village, we were greeted with open arms. The villagers had been waiting for us, hoping that we had found the answers they needed. Kofi and I told them everything we had learned. The balance of fire, water, wind, earth, life, and death. The village listened carefully, and the elders nodded in approval. "You have learned much," they said. "The spirits have blessed you with their knowledge, and now it is time to share that knowledge with the village." Kofi and I spent the next few weeks teaching the village what we had learned. We showed them how to honor the spirits of fire, water, wind, and earth, and how to respect the balance of life and death. The village began to change, slowly but surely, as people learned to live in harmony with nature. The crops grew stronger, the storms were less fierce, and the fire spirit no longer threatened the village. It seemed like the balance had been restored, and the village was finally at peace. But just as we thought everything was returning to normal, a new challenge arose. One evening, a strange figure appeared at the edge of the village. It was a spirit we had never seen before, its form shifting and glowing like a living shadow. The figure spoke in a voice that was both familiar and strange. "You have learned much," it said, "but there is still more to discover. The balance you seek is fragile, and there are forces that wish to destroy it." The spirit introduced itself as the spirit of chaos, a force that thrived on imbalance and destruction. "I have watched you," it said, its voice low and threatening. "You think you have restored the balance, but chaos is always lurking, waiting for the moment to strike." Kofi and I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The spirit of chaos was unlike any spirit we had encountered before. It didn't care about the balance, it wanted to destroy it. We knew we had to stop it, but how? The spirit of chaos unleashed its power, sending shockwaves through the village. The earth trembled, the wind howled, and the sky darkened with storm clouds. The balance we had worked so hard to restore was unraveling before our eyes. Kofi and I knew we had to act fast. We called upon the spirits of fire, water, wind, and earth, hoping they would help us fight back against the chaos. The spirits answered our call, and together, we prepared for the battle of our lives. The battle against the spirit of chaos was fierce. The elements clashed in a whirlwind of power, the air crackling with energy. The village was caught in the middle, and we knew that if we didn't stop the chaos soon, everything would be destroyed. Kofi and I fought alongside the spirits, using everything we had learned on our journey. We had faced fire, storm, water, and death, but this was different. Chaos was unpredictable, and it didn't follow the rules of the balance. As the battle raged on, I realized that the only way to stop the spirit of chaos was to find its heart, the source of its power. Kofi and I fought our way through the storm of chaos, searching for the heart. Finally, we found it, a glowing, pulsing mass of energy at the center of the chaos. We knew what we had to do. With the help of the spirits, we focused all our energy on the heart of chaos. The ground shook, and the sky lit up with a brilliant flash of light. The chaos was fading, and we knew the battle was almost over. With one final push, the heart of chaos shattered, and the spirit of chaos disappeared into the night. The village was silent, the air calm once more. The spirits of fire, water, wind, and earth stood with us, their forms glowing softly in the fading light. "We have done it," I said, my voice filled with relief. "The balance has been restored." The spirits nodded, their faces solemn. "But remember," they said, "the balance is fragile. It must be nurtured and respected, or chaos will return." Kofi and I returned to the village, knowing that our journey was over for now. But we also knew that the balance was something we would always have to protect. The spirits had taught us well, and now it was our turn to teach the village. Together we would ensure that the balance of nature would be respected for generations to come.